Okay, we're on section number 170. Pilate sends Christ over to King Herod from up north. If you might remember that we start off with Herod the Great from many, many years before, and his descendants. There are a number of different Herods that appear in the Bible. And this is Herod the Tetrarch. He is ruling up in the area of Galilee. And so Pilate was happy to not be the only one to bear the burden of the trial when he finds out that as he determines that Christ is from Galilee, then he's very happy to say, well, maybe this should be in this other jurisdiction. Let's see what Herod has to say. Herod might be more familiar with the custom of the Jews himself, and might be able to make a better argument for his judgment. So he's hoping to appeal to him. It doesn't work out very well for him, but anyway. Okay, so we're on question number 949. When Pilate passed off Jesus to Herod, out of his consideration of his local authority, why was Herod anxious to see him? This is going to be based on Luke 23, verses 6 to 7. It says, when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was at Jerusalem at that time. Now, Herod could have been down at Jerusalem for the Passover feast, and so he's visiting down in that area. So the answer that we should have gotten is A. He perceived Jesus to have celebrity status and wanted to see him perform. Verse 8 says, we should include verse 8, which says, and when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceeding glad, for he was desirous to see him of a long season, because he had heard many things of him, and he hoped to have seen some miracle done by him. Okay, so so he sort of had some celebrity status. When you look at B, he felt that Jesus was a threat to his reign. Well, just as Pilate had nothing that he had seen, Herod evidently had nothing that rose to the level of being a threat either. And that really says something, because Herod had far more opportunity to take notice of Christ than Pilate did. The bulk of Jesus' ministry was done up in the northern region around the Sea of Galilee, up in the Galilee region where Herod had his jurisdiction. The only thing that Herod had to really go on was that he'd heard a lot about the miracles that Jesus was doing, since that was what was going on. So there's far less reason for him to judge him. C, he thought Jesus was innocent and wanted to help him. Now, C represents the attitude public officials should have. Public officials should not be so anxious to try to be destroying people. Public officials are supposed to be there to be servants of the people. So rather than dealing in the sensational, whether it is a threat or celebrity, rulers should be equally interested in the rights of the accused. Today, our courts actually go the extra mile to make sure of fair trials in spite of those who want to destroy government in the name of fairness. And so when you look at A, he perceived Jesus to have celebrity status, and he wanted to see him perform. A refers to the attitude that is common in humanity. People love celebrities. People love celebrities. I'd like to share an article from American Heritage that describes this attitude very well. It says, many important things tend to get overlooked in New York City, including its historic places. The nation's first president was inaugurated there, and the general who saved the Union is entombed there. Yet at the sites of both these events, you will usually find more people outside buying hot dogs than inside experiencing history. Even more neglected than Federal Hall and Grant's tomb is the Hall of Fame for Great Americans, a national historic landmark that celebrated its 100th birthday last spring. Now, when we think of the Hall of Fame, typically what people will go to flock to is the Baseball Hall of Fame, or the Aviation Hall of Fame, or the Football Hall. Is there a Football Hall of Fame? There's got to be, Tennis Hall of Fame. There's got to be all kinds. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and people will go to that. And those halls of fame are really built on celebrity, isn't it? Somebody had some talent that he was able to use. There could have been plenty of jerks that are listed there, but the original Hall of Fame, the National Hall of Fame that kicked off the whole idea of even having any kind of Hall of Fame at all, is very much neglected. It says the Hall of Fame for Great Americans was the country's first Hall of Fame. Its success inspired Cooperstown and all the rest. In its early years, induction was the ultimate accolade for an American. Visitors flocked to the uptown campus of New York University, now Bronx Community College, to find inspiration in the noble bronze busts of presidents, generals, scientists, and scholars. But on a warm and lovely weekday afternoon this spring, the only people present in the hall, which was actually an outdoor colonnade, were a pair of workers repairing light fixtures and a few students smoking cigarettes. Today, although the hall is well maintained and scrupulously swept, it remains the very embodiment of the old-fashioned great man view of history, and there was no escaping the contrast between the faces of the inductees and those of the working-class Bronx students outside. The era when history was an assemblage of names and busts now seems as remote as the time when the Bronx was a rural enclave. Staring at statues was a popular form of entertainment, and people knew who Sidney Lair was. He's the Southern poet that can be found in the authors section of the hall. The Hall of Fame can hardly be called a tourist attraction. It stands in a decidedly middle-class neighborhood far from the theaters and theme restaurants of Manhattan. And what made me think to include that was the fact that this is the way real fame ends up lasting. Real fame is not appreciated. Jesus had real fame. Okay, he was somebody who was of note, somebody who just as a prophet, he had at least that, and he is of course far more than that. He is God in the flesh. But what kind of things do people look for? What kind of things did Herod look for? He wanted to see him perform. I heard you do some miracles. Come do some tricks for me. He wasn't looking for the teachings of Christ. He wasn't looking for the character of Christ that was underlying Jesus' miracle working power. He was only interested in the status. Just like today, the Hall of Fame that is there for notable people who actually did have great character, that's forgotten, and it's replaced only by halls of fame for people who have celebrity status. So there's nothing new under the sun. Herod wants to see him perform some miracles. In question 950, and by the way, that can happen in churches too. Are we here for the character of God, or are we looking for the entertainment value of church? Are we looking here to become more like God? Are we looking to come here to become more like Christ? Serving others, reaching out to others, loving others? Or are we looking for the entertainment? There's a lot of people that are looking for the entertainment. Okay, question 950. After questioning Jesus, how did Herod treat him? This is going to be based on Luke 23, verses 9 to 11. Then he questioned with him in many words, but he, that is Jesus, answered him, Herod, nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. And Herod with his men of war set him at naught and mocked him and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him again to Pilate. So after questioning him, how did Herod treat him? He mocked him and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe. He didn't become fearful of him. He didn't become impressed with him, neither fearful nor impressed. Jesus was now at the point where he was beyond preaching and was now only preparing for the crucifixion. Herod had had plenty of time to seek Christ out, so there was no obligation to present anything to influence him one way or the other. Jesus had been out there teaching and preaching all before that for the last 3 years, and so there's really no obligation to give any more. But mocking him and arraying him in a gorgeous robe, this represents the fickle nature of people. Herod was anxious to meet Jesus as a great personality, but he was just as quick to turn on him. This reminds us of the cancel culture of today, where somebody can be celebrated one day and due to some perceived slip be condemned the next. Again, nothing new under the sun. This is the way people are. It's worth noting concerning cancel culture that, especially in the case of historic figures, we celebrate the advancement of society and give credit where credit is due. So many times historic figures' faults are often imagined, misunderstood, and blown out of proportion. We shouldn't be so quick to just cancel people. I found it interesting just coming home, listening to the radio over the weekend, and there's I think it's Mike Connors does a thing on law on the radio. He has a law show. He's up in New York City area here, and because it was Memorial Day weekend, they had just some stories that were going on, and they had somebody being interviewed about a book about Ulysses S. Grant. And U.S. Grant, the way he described it, I don't know an awful lot about U.S. Grant, but the way he was describing it was that he'd become very unpopular after some historian did a hatchet job on him, and he was labeled as one of the worst presidents of the United States in history. And but then, as people have done more studies since then, that he was found to be actually possibly very possibly one of the best presidents the United States ever had. But one of the things that they mentioned was the people's aptness to try to destroy somebody out of cancel culture, and said, oh, U.S. Grant, he had a slave, and he went to free him, but he was a slave owner. And it turns out that it took him like a year to be able to free a slave. Well, the question is, why didn't he do that right away? And I was very surprised to find out that I knew there were always complications if you wanted to free slaves back in those days, but then he explained in more detail. He would have done the guy a great disservice if he had just turned him out loose like that. Because the way the laws were set up, if Grant had any debts that were outstanding, the guy, he might have been set free, but somebody else could have hunted him down and sold him off to pay off the creditors for Grant. So Grant had to go through this very long process to be able to free this guy that had been given to him as a slave. And so the cancel culture of the day is just so quick to judge, and they don't even realize that there's all kinds of these circumstances that they had to go through. If a Christian man or somebody wanted to be able to do something about getting rid of slaves, it wasn't that easy to do. You had to go to court and prove that your debts were paid and all kinds of stuff. And then there were other issues that they had to deal with also. And so when we go to look at greatness, instead of being like Herod and just looking for, is the person a performer? Is the person a magician of some kind? No, we need to consider true greatness. True greatness. Okay. Question 951. How did their examination of Jesus affect Pilate and Herod? And we're going to base this on Luke 23, verses 12 and 15. It says, in the same day, Pilate and Herod were made friends together, for before they were at enmity between themselves. No, nor yet Herod, for I sent him to you, is verse 15, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done unto him. So Pilate is saying that, he couldn't find anything wrong, not even him nor Herod. So the answer is? C. How did their examination of Jesus affect Pilate and Herod? Herod's determination of not finding anything he was guilty of supported Pilate's claim, which brought them together. What's going to come up a little bit later on, we were talking about this, but Pilate never does give a verdict of guilty. Okay, he ends up letting the Jews take Christ and crucify him, but he doesn't actually call him guilty. His verdict in the court case is, I find no fault in him. And so really, this sort of is there to bolster Herod's finding nothing wrong, sort of confirms Pilate's suspicions. Okay, so for A and B, it divided them because Pilate was persecuting a Jew. Oh, could have been that way. Keep in mind, though, that Herod was really from in the house of Herod. They were actually Edomites, and so, but he was still ruling over Israel. But he didn't look at this in an ethnic way. Since Herod couldn't make a helpful determination, their relationship didn't change. Well, no, they're not being able to find a problem brought them together. So there was nothing that either one could find helpful in finding fault with Jesus, as in B, and it should have ended in each one not really knowing what to do or to take any action at all. A represents the old adage that politics makes strange bedfellows. Whereas Herod and Pilate certainly had cause to be at odds based on ethnic division, their causes did not serve to divide them. Okay, so C, what Pilate does reference is that he and Herod were in agreement that the Jews' claims were unfounded. They at least had that in common now. Pilate at least didn't have Herod working against him, and Herod could have felt respected by Pilate. He could have said, oh, well, it was nice that you thought to ask my opinion about this. Okay, question 952. What was Pilate willing to do? And this is based on Luke 23, verses 13 to 16. And Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said unto them, You have brought this man unto me as one that perverteth the people. And behold, I have examined him before you, and have found no fault in this man touching those things whereof you accuse him. No, nor yet Herod, for I sent you to him, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done unto him. I will therefore chastise him and release him. So what was Pilate willing to do? Chastise and release him.
Chastise him and release him.
Yeah. Pilate appears to have hoped that this token punishment would have satisfied the Jews, especially this was actually customary. He must have felt that this would be a good political solution, but he grossly underestimated the hatred and fear that the Jewish leaders had for Jesus. If anything, political animus is something that he should have been familiar with. The Jews were not going to be distracted from their cause. Okay, so having gone to Herod, Christ still is having, I should say, the Jews are still making no headway. They just can't seem to get through with anything. They're going to step up their game. They're going to try to do anything, and that should remind us that we are not greater than Christ. If they're going to do that to Christ, if the world is going to do that to Christ, what will they do to people who are less powerful than Christ? Really go after them. So we should not be surprised when persecution enters in the world.